The auditorium buzzed with that particular energy you only find at high school graduations. Proud parents adjusting cameras, younger siblings fidgeting in their seats. The scent of corsages mixing with the smell of old wood and floor polish. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching dust motes that floated above rows of folding chairs. I sat near the middle, my hands folded tightly in my lap, watching my granddaughter in her cap and gown as she took her seat with the other graduates. 17 years old, and she looked so grown up, so poised. My heart swelled with pride. Around me, the extended family filled an entire section: cousins, aunts, uncles, church friends. Our community church had turned out in force, as they always did for family milestones. We were known for that, for showing up, for maintaining appearances of unity and strength. I nodded at familiar faces, exchanged quiet smiles, all of us performing this familiar dance. The ceremony moved forward with speeches and awards. Then came the time for family toasts. My stomach tightened when I saw my cousin stand up. He was always so charming, so confident, the kind of person who commanded a room without even trying. He made his way to the microphone with that easy smile everyone loved, and the crowd settled, ready to be entertained. "I want to say a few words about our graduate," he began, his voice warm and jovial. People leaned forward. I saw my granddaughter look up, uncertain but polite. She's accomplished a lot, no doubt about that. Straight A's, college-bound, we're all proud. There was a pause. His smile shifted just slightly into something sharper. "But I have to be honest," he continued, and I felt ice slide down my spine. "Some of her choices worry me. All this talk about Jesus, about faith, about prayer." He said the words like they tasted bitter. "It's naive, really. Childish. In the real world, you need more than ancient stories and wishful thinking. I hope college teaches her to grow up, to put away these simplistic ideas." The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of anticipation, but the heavy, suffocating silence of shock. I heard someone gasp. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. My granddaughter's face flushed deep red, her eyes dropping to her lap. Her fingers clutched the edge of her gown. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Heat flooded my chest, my face. I wanted to stand, to say something, to defend her. But I couldn't move. Around me, the family elders exchanged quick, uncomfortable glances. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence pressed in from all sides, like walls closing around us. My cousin continued talking, but I barely heard him. The words blurred together. All I could see was my granddaughter sitting there, alone, humiliated in front of everyone she knew, and all I could feel was the familiar weight of shame, that old companion I'd carried my whole life, settling back onto my shoulders like a coat I'd never quite managed to take off. Why does he do this? I thought. Why attack her faith, her hope, the one thing that gives her peace? And why now, in front of everyone? But I already knew the answer. This was about control, about keeping everyone in line, about making sure no one stepped outside the carefully drawn boundaries of what our family considered acceptable. My granddaughter had committed the cardinal sin. She'd become too different, too sincere, too vulnerable with her beliefs. The ceremony ended. People filed out, their conversations forced and brittle. No one mentioned what had just happened. That was our way: pretend nothing was wrong, maintain the surface peace, protect the family image at all costs. But I couldn't stop replaying the day in my mind, trying to understand how we'd arrived at this moment. Earlier that afternoon, before the ceremony, we'd all gathered at the church fellowship hall. It was supposed to be a celebration, a chance to share a meal before heading to the graduation. Long tables covered with white paper tablecloths held trays of sandwiches, potato salad, sweet tea in plastic pitchers. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and someone had put up a "Congratulations, Graduate" banner that sagged slightly in the middle. I'd sat at one of the tables, nursing a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm, watching the family move around me. My cousin held court near the refreshment table, laughing loudly at his own jokes, clapping people on the shoulder. He was good at this, making everyone feel included, making them laugh. But I'd seen him too many times to miss the calculation behind the charm, the way he measured each person's usefulness, their loyalty. My granddaughter stood off to the side, polite but uncomfortable. She smiled when spoken to, nodded at the right times, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She didn't belong here, not really. She'd grown beyond this, beyond the careful pretense and unspoken rules. One of the church elders, Mrs. Patterson, leaned toward me. "It's so important we all keep the peace today," she said quietly, her voice sweet but firm. "Family unity is a testimony, you know. We don't want any unpleasantness." I nodded, the expected response. But inside, something twisted. How long can this silence last, I wondered. How many more years can we pretend everything is fine while wounds fester beneath the surface? The weight of all those years pressed down on me. Times when I'd wanted to speak up and didn't. Times when I'd watched someone get hurt and said nothing. Times when keeping the peace meant swallowing pain, mine or someone else's. I was caught, like always, between two impossible choices: protect my granddaughter or protect the fragile peace that held our family together. Both felt necessary. Both felt impossible. 10 years earlier, I'd learned the rules that still governed me. I was at my mother's house, the small ranch-style home where I'd grown up, with its worn carpet and the smell of pot roast that never quite left the kitchen. Family members had gathered around the dinner table, and I'd been maybe 12 or 13, old enough to understand, but young enough to be scared. There had been an argument. I don't even remember what it was about. Money, probably. Or someone's choices that didn't meet the family's approval. Whatever it was, it had gotten loud, voices rising, chairs scraping back. Then the adults had noticed us kids, listening from the doorway. "Go to your room," my mother had said, her voice tight. Later, after things had quieted down, she'd pulled me aside. We stood in the dim hallway outside my bedroom, and she'd put her hands on my shoulders, her grip firm. "Listen to me carefully," she'd said. "What happens in this family stays in this family. We don't air our dirty laundry. We don't talk about our problems to outsiders. We protect each other by keeping quiet. Do you understand?" I'd nodded, not really understanding, but knowing it was important, knowing that something had shifted. That night, I learned that love meant silence, that loyalty meant swallowing your pain, that family image mattered more than family truth. The lesson took root deep. For decades, I'd lived by it. I'd kept quiet when I should have spoken. I'd smiled when I wanted to scream. I'd protected people who didn't deserve protection and abandoned people who needed me, all in the name of keeping the peace, maintaining the family name, avoiding the shame of exposure. But what had that silence cost? What had it cost me and everyone else who'd learned the same bitter lesson? Moments before the ceremony began, I'd gone looking for my granddaughter. I found her in a quiet hallway backstage, away from the crowds. She sat on a folding chair against the wall, her hands folded, her eyes closed. She was praying. I could see her lips moving slightly, forming words I couldn't hear. There was something about her posture, shoulders relaxed, face peaceful, that struck me. She wasn't performing. She wasn't anxious. In that moment, surrounded by all the pressure and expectations of the day, she had found a place of genuine stillness. I stopped, not wanting to interrupt something so private. But she must have sensed me because her eyes opened and she smiled. "Hey, Grandma," she said softly. "Hey, sweetheart." I sat down beside her. "You ready?" "I think so." She touched the small silver cross necklace at her throat, a gift from her youth group. "I'm a little nervous." "About the ceremony?" "About everything." She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something I'd lost decades ago. Hope mixed with fear. Courage tempered with uncertainty. I know the family doesn't understand my faith. I know some of them think I'm being silly or dramatic. But Grandma, it's real to me. Jesus is real to me. And I don't want to pretend otherwise, even if that makes things awkward. Her words pierced something in my chest. This girl, this beautiful, brave girl, was willing to stand for what she believed, even when it cost her acceptance. When had I last done that? When had I last chosen truth over comfort? "I'm proud of you," I said, my voice catching slightly. She squeezed my hand. "I pray for our family every day. I pray that somehow God will break through all the walls we've built. That we'll learn to be honest with each other, to forgive each other. Is that naive?" "No," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "No, sweetheart, that's not naive." But sitting there, I wondered, can faith really bring peace to a family like ours? Or does it just cause more conflict, more division? What does God want from me in all this? Do I stand beside her and risk everything? Or do I protect her by keeping quiet, by helping her learn to navigate the family rules like I did? I didn't have answers. I only had the familiar weight of fear. The night before the graduation, my cousin had hosted a gathering at his home. It was presented as a planning session for church volunteers, something about the fall outreach program, but really it was one of those events where he could showcase his leadership, his influence. I'd gone because it was expected, because refusing would have been noticed, would have been a small rebellion I wasn't ready for. His living room was tastefully decorated, expensive but not showy. He'd offered wine and cheese, made jokes that had everyone laughing. He moved through the room like a conductor, orchestrating the mood, the conversation, making sure everyone saw him as generous, capable, in control. I watched him work the room. When one volunteer started talking about struggling with a difficult family situation, he smoothly redirected the conversation before it could get too vulnerable, too real. "Let's not dwell on problems tonight," he'd said with an easy smile, raising his glass. "We're here to celebrate what's working." Everyone had laughed, grateful for permission to stay on the surface. He positioned himself at the center of every cluster of people, his hand on someone's shoulder, his voice just loud enough to draw others in. It was masterful, really, and exhausting to watch. But late in the evening, when most people had left, I'd overheard him talking to one of the other church leaders in the kitchen. His voice had changed, hardened. The easy charm had dropped away. "These young people with their emotional faith drives me crazy," he'd said. "All feelings, no discipline. They think showing weakness is somehow spiritual. It's pathetic. We need to maintain standards, maintain respect. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart." The other man had murmured agreement, but I'd heard the undertone of unease. This wasn't concern for the church. This was something else. Fear dressed up as righteousness, insecurity masked by control. I'd left shortly after, but the conversation haunted me. I saw then what I'd always sensed but never admitted. My cousin's charm was armor. His control was desperation. He needed everyone to follow his rules, because underneath, he was terrified of what might happen if they didn't. Terrified of vulnerability, of honesty, of anything that might expose the cracks in his carefully constructed image. And our whole family had given him that power. We'd let him set the terms, define the boundaries, because we were all afraid of the same things: shame, rejection, the discomfort of truth. Earlier that graduation day, during the fellowship hall gathering, the family elders had pulled me aside. 3 older women who'd known our family for generations, who'd watched me grow up, who carried the weight of family tradition and expectation. "We need to talk to you," Mrs. Patterson had said, guiding me to a quiet corner near the kitchen. "About your granddaughter." My defenses went up immediately. "What about her?" "We know she's been very vocal about her faith," another elder said carefully. "And that's wonderful, of course. But we're worried about how that might affect family unity, especially with everything else going on. Your cousin, he's under a lot of stress. He's doing so much for the church. We need to make sure nothing disrupts that." Translation: keep your granddaughter quiet. Don't let her faith become a problem. Protect his status, his reputation, his control. "We're just asking you to help her understand the importance of keeping the peace," Mrs. Patterson said gently, "of not rocking the boat. Family unity is our testimony to the community. We can't afford division." I'd nodded, said something non-committal, but inside I felt something crack. This was it, the moment I'd been avoiding my whole life. The moment where staying silent meant actively choosing the wrong side, meant participating in something that felt increasingly like betrayal. They were asking me to silence my granddaughter's faith, to protect a man's pride. They were asking me to teach her the same painful lessons I'd learned: that image matters more than truth, that keeping peace matters more than keeping integrity, that family loyalty means abandoning people who need you most. And I realized, standing there with their expectant faces looking at me, that I couldn't do it. Not this time, not when it meant crushing the beautiful, honest faith of someone I loved. But I also couldn't say that out loud. Not yet. Not without consequences I wasn't ready to face. So I'd nodded and smiled and said I'd think about it. And then I'd gone back to my seat and drunk my lukewarm coffee and felt the weight of silence grow heavier than ever before. Sitting now in the auditorium after the ceremony, watching people file out with their forced smiles and careful avoidance of what had just happened, I felt something shift inside me. A small movement, like ice beginning to crack, like ground beginning to thaw after a long winter. I was 62 years old. I'd spent decades protecting the wrong things, sacrificing the wrong people. I'd chosen peace over truth so many times I'd lost count. And what had it gotten me? What had it gotten any of us? A family that couldn't be honest with each other. Relationships built on pretense and fear. A young woman sitting alone and humiliated because no one would stand beside her. Is this what God wants? I thought. Is this what faith looks like? Silence in the face of cruelty, compliance in the face of control, image over integrity? I looked at my granddaughter gathering her things, her shoulders hunched, her face still flushed, and I knew with a certainty that both terrified and clarified me that something had to change. I didn't know what that change would look like. I didn't know if I had the courage to follow through. I didn't know if speaking up would heal anything or just make everything worse. But I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. The cost was too high. The pain was too deep. The lie was too obvious. Somewhere, somehow, I was going to have to find my voice. And I was going to have to trust that God, the God my granddaughter prayed to with such honest hope, would meet me in that terrifying moment of truth. The question was when, and the question was how, and the question was whether I could survive what would come next. I stood up slowly, gathering my things. Around me, the family filed out, maintaining their careful silence, protecting their comfortable lies. And I walked with them, still part of the pattern. But inside, something had begun to break. That evening, after the ceremony, we returned to the church fellowship hall. But this time, the atmosphere had changed. The air felt thick, tense. People gathered in small clusters, their voices low and guarded. I stood near the refreshment table, my coffee untouched, watching the family fracture in real time. Some relatives huddled around my cousin, defending him. "He was just being honest," I heard one uncle say. "Kids these days need a reality check." They nodded in agreement, reinforcing the familiar walls of denial. But others, mostly younger family members and a few from the church, had gathered around my granddaughter. She sat quietly while they offered quiet words of encouragement. One of her youth group friends held her hand. Someone else mentioned how much her faith had inspired them. The whispers spread like ripples in water. "Did you hear what he said? Can you believe it? In front of everyone?" The family was splitting, lines being drawn, and I stood in the middle, paralyzed. I felt angry at my cousin's cruelty, the way he'd used a sacred moment to wound someone vulnerable. But I also felt that old familiar fear. If I spoke up now, if I took a side, what would it cost me? Who would I lose? The family had always prioritized unity above all else, even if that unity was built on silence and pretense. And here I was, watching it all unravel. My cousin held court across the room, his charm slightly diminished but still present. He laughed at someone's joke, but his eyes kept darting around, measuring reactions, calculating damage control. He caught me looking at him once, and for a brief moment, something passed between us. Recognition maybe, or warning. Who truly cares about truth here, I wondered. Everyone seemed more concerned about managing the situation than addressing what had actually happened. My granddaughter had been publicly humiliated, and we were all pretending it was a matter of opinion, a difference in perspective. I wanted to find my voice. I wanted to stand beside her and say, "This was wrong. What you said was cruel and unjust." But the words stuck in my throat. Decades of training kept them locked inside. The next afternoon, I drove to my cousin's house. The anger that had simmered all night had pushed me past my usual caution. I found him in his backyard, supposedly working on his garden, though he mostly just stood there with pruning shears in his hands, not actually cutting anything. "We need to talk," I said, closing the gate behind me. He looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "About? About what you did yesterday? About what you said to my granddaughter in front of everyone." He set down the shears and sighed, running a hand through his hair. For a moment he looked tired, older. "Look, I was just trying to..." "To what? Humiliate her? Show everyone you're in charge?" The charm dropped away. His face hardened. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The expectations. Everyone looks to me for leadership, for stability, and then she comes along with this naive, emotional faith that makes us all look weak." "She's 17 years old," I said, my voice shaking. "She believes in something. She has hope. Since when is that a crime?" He turned away, staring at his carefully manicured rose bushes. "You know what my father used to say? Show no weakness. Never let them see you vulnerable. I've built everything on that principle. My position at the church, the family's respect, everything. And now this girl threatens all of it by being so open about her feelings, her doubts, her faith." I saw it then. The crack in his armor. His voice had changed. The bitterness was real, but underneath it was something else. Fear, deep, consuming fear. "What are you so afraid of?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "That if people see the real me, they'll leave. That if I'm not perfect, not strong, not in control, everything falls apart. My marriage, my position, my relationships, all of it depends on maintaining this image." I felt my anger soften, just slightly. This wasn't about my granddaughter at all. This was about wounds so old and deep he'd spent decades building walls around them. But recognizing his pain didn't erase what he'd done. It just made everything more complicated. "I don't know if I can forgive this," I said. He finally looked at me. "I'm not asking you to." I left his backyard more confused than when I'd arrived. Part of me wanted to hate him, to write him off as cruel and irredeemable. But I'd seen the broken person behind the mask, and that made forgiveness feel both more necessary and more impossible. Late that night, I sat alone in my living room, unable to sleep. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. I'd been avoiding it all evening, but finally, I reached for the Bible on my coffee table, an old NIV translation my mother had given me decades ago. I opened it randomly, not sure what I was looking for. Maybe comfort. Maybe answers. Maybe just a distraction from the chaos swirling in my head. The pages fell open to Psalms. My eyes landed on chapter 34, verse 18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." I read it again and again. Close to the brokenhearted. My granddaughter was brokenhearted. My cousin was brokenhearted. I was brokenhearted. All of us carrying wounds we'd never properly acknowledged or healed. Was God really close to us in all this mess? Could He be? I'd spent so many years treating faith as something distant, something other people did with more conviction. I went to church because it was expected, sang the hymns because everyone else did, but I'd never really let God near the broken places inside me. I closed my eyes and tried to pray. The words felt clumsy, unpracticed. "God, if you're really there, if you're really close, I need help. I don't know how to navigate this. I don't know how to love people who hurt each other, who hurt me. I don't know how to be honest without destroying everything." I sat in the silence, waiting. No dramatic answer came, no voice from heaven, but something shifted just slightly, a small sense that maybe I wasn't as alone as I felt. Maybe letting go of control, admitting my own brokenness, was the first step towards something real. 3 days later, I sat in a small meeting room at the church, watching the elders discuss the graduation incident, like it was a PR problem to be managed. 6 of them, 5 men and 1 woman, all older, all invested in maintaining the church's reputation in the community. "We need to move forward," the lead elder said, his hands folded on the table. "What happened was unfortunate, but dwelling on it will only create more division. Family unity should be our priority." "But what about what was said?" I asked. "What about the harm done?" Mrs. Patterson gave me that patient, condescending look I'd received so many times before. "Dear, we all say things we don't mean sometimes. The important thing is not to let a momentary misstep divide us. The church's witness depends on our unity. Even if that unity is a lie." The words came out before I could stop them. The room went silent. The lead elder frowned. "That's a strong accusation, is it? We're sitting here deciding to ignore what happened, to minimize it, to pretend everything's fine. We're choosing reputation over truth. How is that different from lying?" "Your loyalty to your granddaughter is admirable," another elder said carefully. "But you need to consider the bigger picture. Your cousin does important work for this church. We can't afford to undermine his leadership over a family disagreement. I looked around the table at their faces, all of them kind people, sincere in their faith, but trapped in the same patterns I'd been trapped in my whole life. Protect the image. Maintain the peace. Don't ask hard questions. I think the church is supposed to be a place of healing, I said quietly, not a place where we hide wounds to look good. No one had an answer to that. The meeting ended shortly after, with vague promises to pray about it and give it time. I walked out feeling more alone than ever, but also strangely resolved. If the church wouldn't address this, if the elders wouldn't stand for truth, then I would have to find another way. 5 days later, my phone rang at 11 p.m. My daughter's voice came through, panicked. "Mom, it's about your cousin. He collapsed. They're taking him to the emergency room. You need to come." I threw on clothes and drove to the hospital, my heart pounding. The ER waiting room was already full of family members when I arrived, some crying, some praying, all of them scared. My daughter met me at the door. "What happened?" I asked. "They don't know yet. He complained of chest pain and then just collapsed. The doctors are running tests." We waited. Hours passed. Coffee was consumed. Prayers were whispered. Old tensions were temporarily forgotten in the face of possible tragedy. I found myself praying too, silent, desperate prayers. Despite everything, the cruelty, the control, the wounds, I didn't want him to die. I wanted him to have the chance to heal, to change, to find whatever peace had eluded him all these years. Around 2 a.m., a doctor came out. Her expression was carefully professional. "We've stabilized him. He's resting now. But I have to tell you, we're concerned. The preliminary tests suggest a serious cardiac condition. We'll need to keep him here for observation and run more tests in the morning." The family processed this in stunned silence. My cousin's wife started crying softly. Someone suggested we all go home and come back in the morning, but I couldn't leave. Something about this crisis felt like a turning point, like God was shaking all of us awake. The next morning, I returned to the hospital. The family had gathered again, waiting for the doctors to update us. My cousin's wife looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. My granddaughter was there too, sitting quietly in the corner, her face a mix of concern and confusion. The same doctor from the night before emerged from the ICU, and this time her expression was different. Not worried, puzzled. "I need to talk to the family about your cousin's condition," she said, gathering us close. I'm not sure how to explain this. The tests we ran this morning show significant improvement. The cardiac markers that were extremely elevated last night have returned to near normal levels. His heart function, which showed serious dysfunction, appears to have stabilized. "That's good news," someone said. "It's more than good news," the doctor said carefully. "It's unusual. This kind of rapid recovery isn't typical. We're running additional tests to confirm, but at this moment he appears to be out of danger." I can't explain it medically. The family exchanged looks. Shock, relief, confusion. My granddaughter's eyes were wide. Someone whispered, "It's a miracle." I felt something shift inside me, something I couldn't quite name. Awe, maybe, or recognition. This felt like more than coincidence, more than good luck. This felt like mercy breaking through our carefully constructed walls, demanding attention. When they finally let us see him, my cousin looked small in the hospital bed, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him before. The tubes and monitors stripped away all pretense. He couldn't charm his way out of this. He couldn't control the narrative. He was just a scared, broken man who'd been given an unexpected gift, more time. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly when he saw me. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Was God at work here? And if he was, what was I supposed to do with this mercy? 1 week after graduation, I found myself sorting through old family papers in my attic. I'd been putting off the task for months, but something drew me up there that quiet afternoon. Boxes of photographs, old letters, documents dating back decades. The accumulated debris of family history. Tucked in an envelope marked with my cousin's name, I found a letter. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting familiar but younger somehow. I almost put it back, but curiosity won. I sat down on an old trunk and began to read. The letter was dated 15 years ago. It was written to someone, maybe a therapist, maybe never sent. But the words hit me like a physical blow. I'm terrified every day that people will discover I'm not who they think I am. My father's voice echoes in my head constantly. Be strong. Never show weakness. Winners don't cry. But I am weak. I am afraid. I've built this entire life on a foundation of pretense, and I don't know how to stop. Every relationship I have is transactional. What can they give me? How can they reinforce my image? I'm so lonely. But if I let them see the real me, the failures, the doubts, the crushing fear of abandonment, they'll leave. Everyone always leaves. The letter continued, detailing childhood wounds I'd never known about, moments of rejection and shame that had shaped him into the controlling, charming, defended person I knew today. Reading it felt like looking at a map of his entire life. Every cruel word he'd spoken, every manipulation, every wall he'd built, all of it traced back to a terrified child who'd learned that vulnerability meant danger. I sat there in the dusty attic light, tears streaming down my face. This didn't excuse what he'd done to my granddaughter. It didn't erase the years of family dysfunction, but it explained so much. His cruelty wasn't malice. It was survival. His need for control wasn't pride. It was desperation. Understanding his pain changed everything. The anger I'd been carrying started to shift into something else. Not pity exactly, but a kind of sad recognition. We'd all been trapped in the same patterns, all carrying wounds we'd never acknowledged, all protecting ourselves at the expense of real connection. How could Jesus' mercy guide my response now? The question felt both urgent and terrifying, because mercy meant risk. It meant confronting truth without weapons. It meant offering grace even when it wasn't deserved, especially when it wasn't deserved. 10 days after graduation, the family gathered again at the church fellowship hall. This time, it wasn't for celebration or casual conversation. The elders had called a meeting to address ongoing family tensions. Translation: they wanted to shut down any further discussion and restore the appearance of unity. But I came prepared. I brought the letter. The room filled slowly. My cousin, now released from the hospital, looking subdued. His wife, my granddaughter and her parents, various aunts, uncles, cousins, the elders at the front, already wearing their patient management expressions. The lead elder began with a prayer, then launched into a speech about forgiveness, unity, and moving forward. But before he could finish, I stood up. "I need to say something," I said, my voice shaking. The room went quiet. My cousin looked at me warily. The elders frowned. I held up the letter. "I found this recently. It's something my cousin wrote years ago and, with his permission." I looked at him, giving him the chance to object. He closed his eyes but nodded slightly. "I want to share part of it, because I think it explains a lot about why we're here." I read sections of the letter aloud. With each word, I watched the room transform. Some family members shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, listening. My cousin's face went through a range of emotions: shame, fear, and finally, something like relief. When I finished, I set the letter down. "I'm sharing this not to humiliate anyone, but because I think we've all been living with secrets and shame for too long. We've all been so afraid of being seen, of being vulnerable, that we've hurt each other over and over. And I'm as guilty as anyone. I looked at my cousin. What you said to my granddaughter was wrong. It was cruel. But I understand now that it came from a place of deep pain. And I want you to know, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because that's what grace means. That's what Jesus did for all of us. My cousin's face crumpled. He buried his head in his hands, and his shoulders shook with sobs. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice broken. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how to be different. I don't know how to stop protecting myself." Some relatives reacted defensively, uncomfortable with such raw emotion. "This is private business," someone muttered. "This shouldn't be aired here." But others, including some of the younger family members, moved closer, offering comfort. My granddaughter, with a courage that astounded me, got up and walked over to my cousin. She knelt beside his chair. "I forgive you too," she said quietly, "and I've been praying for you. I still am." The room felt charged, balanced on a knife's edge. We could retreat back into our comfortable patterns, or we could step forward into something new and terrifying and potentially healing. The elders exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unsure how to manage this unscripted moment of truth. I was exhausted. My hands trembled. Part of me wanted to take it all back, to smooth things over, to restore the familiar peace. But I couldn't. Not anymore. The cost of silence had become too high. "I don't know if this fixes anything," I said to the room. "I don't know if we can heal from years of hiding and hurting. But I do know we can't keep pretending. We have to choose grace or silence, truth or image. I'm choosing truth, even if it costs me everything." The meeting didn't end with neat resolution. Some family members left angry. Others stayed, uncertain but willing to try. My cousin and I talked quietly afterward, beginning what would be a long, difficult conversation about forgiveness and change. I drove home that night feeling raw and vulnerable and strangely free. I'd done it. I'd found my voice. I'd spoken truth in love. I'd chosen courage over comfort. And somehow, I knew this was just the beginning. Late that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, unable to sleep. The events of the evening kept replaying in my mind, the confrontation, the tears, the raw honesty. My Bible lay on the nightstand, where I'd left it earlier that week. I picked it up. Its familiar weight, somehow comforting. I flipped through the pages until I found Matthew, chapter 5. My eyes landed on verses 43 through 48. "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." Matthew 5:43-45. I read the words again slowly. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. My cousin's face came to mind, not the charming mask he wore in public, but the broken man I'd seen in the hospital, the frightened person revealed in that old letter. Was he my enemy? Or was he just another wounded soul trying to survive in a broken world? The scripture continued, "If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." Matthew 5:46-48. Perfect. The word hit me hard. Not perfect in the way my family had always demanded. Flawless image, controlled emotions, hidden wounds, but perfect in the way Jesus modeled. Honest, vulnerable, merciful, loving even when it cost everything. I closed my eyes and tried to pray. God, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can truly love him after what he did, but I want to. I want to be the kind of person who chooses grace over revenge, truth over image. Help me. Please help me love as Jesus does." The words felt inadequate, clumsy, but something shifted inside me as I spoke them. The anger I'd been carrying started to loosen its grip. Not disappearing, I wasn't that far along yet, but softening, making room for something else. Compassion, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. I felt God's tender invitation in that moment. Lay down your fear. Lay down your anger. Trust me with this. It wasn't easy. Every instinct I had screamed to protect myself, to stay guarded, to keep my walls up. But a new courage was growing inside me, fragile but real. The courage to be vulnerable, to risk getting hurt, to choose love, even when it felt impossible. The next Sunday afternoon, I found myself in the church's small group room. I almost hadn't come. After the confrontation at the family meeting, I felt exposed, uncertain how people would react. But my granddaughter had encouraged me. "They need to hear your story, Grandma," she'd said. "It might help someone else." About 8 people sat in a circle of folding chairs. The group leader, a gentle woman named Sarah, opened her Bible. Today we're looking at John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. The story of the woman caught in adultery. She read the passage aloud. The religious leaders dragging the woman before Jesus, demanding she be stoned according to the law. Jesus' response: "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." John 8:7. And then, after everyone left, "Neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." John 8:11. Jesus didn't ignore her sin, Sarah said, but he also didn't condemn her. He offered her mercy and a new beginning. What does this story say to us about how we treat each other? The group was quiet for a moment. Then someone spoke up about judgment and grace. Another person shared about struggling to forgive a family member. The conversation opened up, became real. I found myself speaking, my voice shaking slightly. I've been part of a family culture that was quick to judge and slow to show mercy. We threw stones at each other constantly, just with words instead of rocks. And last week, I realized I was doing the same thing, ready to condemn someone without examining my own failures. I told them about the confrontation, about finding the letter, about choosing to speak truth mixed with grace instead of pure anger. "I'm learning that mercy isn't weakness," I said. "It's actually the hardest, bravest thing we can do." Jesus modeled that for us. He saw the woman's sin clearly, but he also saw her worth, her potential, her need for grace. After the meeting, several people came up to me. One woman hugged me and whispered, "Thank you, I needed to hear that." A young man shared his own story of family wounds. I felt less alone than I had in years. Hearing Jesus' mercy modeled in Scripture and seeing it reflected in this community gave me hope that grace really could heal even the deepest family wounds. As I drove home, I found myself thinking about a sermon I'd heard months ago before all of this started. The pastor had preached on 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. I remembered him reading it with such conviction. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9. At the time, I'd filed it away as a nice theological concept, but now it echoed in my mind with new meaning. God's power made perfect in weakness. Not in spite of weakness, but through it. Because when we're weak, when we're broken, when we admit we can't do this on our own, that's when God can work. I'd spent my whole life trying to be strong, trying to hold everything together, trying to maintain control. And what had it gotten me? A family fractured by secrets, relationships built on pretense, a granddaughter publicly humiliated while I sat silent. But now, admitting my brokenness, confessing my failures, standing vulnerable before my family, that had opened the door for something real, for grace to move, for healing to begin. My weakness wasn't a barrier to God's work. It was the entry point, the place where His strength could shine through, and that realization changed everything. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to have all the answers. I just had to be honest and let God fill the gaps. 2 weeks after graduation, we gathered again at the church fellowship hall. This time felt different. Less confrontational, more hopeful. The family had asked to meet, not to argue or defend, but to listen and respond. I brought the letter again, but this time with a different spirit, not as a weapon, but as a bridge. My cousin sat across from me, his wife beside him, looking nervous but present. My granddaughter sat nearby, quiet but supportive. Other family members filled the room, some curious, some skeptical, all watching to see what would happen. I took a breath and began. I want to start by saying, I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here because I love this family, broken as we are, and I believe we can be better. We can be more honest, more merciful, more like the family God intended us to be. I held up the letter. I shared this last time because I wanted everyone to understand the pain we've all been carrying. But today, I want to focus on something else, on the possibility of healing, on what it means to truly forgive and be forgiven. My cousin spoke up, his voice hoarse. I owe you all an apology. Especially you, he looked at my granddaughter. What I said at your graduation was cruel and unjust. It came from my own insecurity and fear, not from any real concern about you. I'm sorry, truly sorry. Tears rolled down his cheeks. Some family members shifted uncomfortably. We weren't used to this level of vulnerability. But others leaned forward, listening. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy, he continued. Trying to earn love by being perfect, by being strong, by staying in control. And in the process, I hurt the people I was supposed to protect. I don't know how to fix that, but I want to try. My granddaughter stood and walked over to him. She knelt beside his chair, just as she had at the previous meeting. I forgive you, she said simply, and I'm going to keep praying for you, for all of us, that we learn to be honest with each other, that we learn to love like Jesus loves us. The room was silent. Then my cousin's wife started crying. One of the elders cleared his throat and said, Maybe we've been wrong about some things. Maybe protecting our image isn't the same as protecting our faith. It wasn't a dramatic Hollywood moment. Some relatives remained uncomfortable, uncertain how to process such raw emotion. But something shifted. The heavy weight of silence that had pressed down on our family for generations began to lift just slightly. We were choosing truth over comfort, grace over judgment. I felt relief mixed with exhaustion. This was costly, confronting decades of patterns, risking rejection, standing vulnerable before people who might not understand. But it was also right. God's mercy was moving among us, fragile but real. And I realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter. It was about choosing love over fear, about releasing the need for revenge, about trusting God with justice and healing. What will it take to keep walking this path? Someone asked quietly. I don't know, I admitted. One honest conversation at a time, one choice to extend grace instead of judgment, one prayer asking God to help us love better. It won't be easy, but I think it's worth it. Several months later, I found myself standing in my kitchen preparing dinner for the family. The evening light filtered through the window above the sink, casting a warm glow across the counter. The smell of roasting chicken filled the air. They arrived gradually. My daughter and her husband, my granddaughter, my cousin and his wife, a few others. The conversation as we gathered around the table was light, easy. Someone told a joke. Laughter rippled through the room. Genuine laughter, not the forced kind we'd specialized in before. My cousin and my granddaughter shared a story about a church event they'd both attended. They teased each other gently, the kind of playful banter that only happens when real affection exists. The elders, who'd once insisted on silence, now smiled warmly, participating in the honesty. I looked around the table at these faces I'd known my whole life. We weren't perfect. We still had difficult moments, disagreements, old patterns that cropped up. But the walls between us were softening. The fear that had governed us for so long was losing its grip. As we ate, I felt a deep sense of peace, gratitude even. We'd walked through fire to get here, but we'd come out on the other side more real, more capable of genuine love. Forgiveness was alive in these small moments of joy and honesty. Some mornings now, I wake early for quiet time. I sit by my bedroom window with coffee and my Bible, watching the sun come up. There's a bookmark I keep in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16. That verse means something different to me now. Before, I thought shining my light meant showing people how good, how strong, how together I was. But now I understand it means living honestly and humbly, letting people see both my strengths and my struggles, trusting that God's grace covers all of it. I pray differently now too, not perfectly, I'm still learning, but more honestly. I tell God about my fears, my failures, my ongoing struggles with family dynamics, and somehow, in admitting my weakness, I find strength. His strength, not mine. The Bible's call to authentic light guides me beyond the old fear of shame. I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to maintain the image. God's acceptance covers my mistakes and fuels my growth. That freedom is worth everything I risked to find it. A few months later, I was walking through the neighborhood park with my cousin. The afternoon air was cool, leaves just starting to turn colors. We walked the familiar path around the pond, talking about everything and nothing. You know what's funny, he said. I spent years being terrified. People would see the real me. And now that they have, now that I've stopped hiding, I feel more accepted than I ever did before. I smiled. That's grace for you. It does the opposite of what we expect. I still struggle, he admitted. Old habits die hard. Sometimes I catch myself slipping back into the charm, the control. But now I have people who call me on it. People who love me enough to be honest. We walked in comfortable silence for a while. Then I said, I remembered something the other day. That verse from Psalms. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I held on to that during the darkest moments. And it was true. God was close. Even when I couldn't feel it, He was working. He still is, my cousin said quietly, working in all of us. I nodded. The journey wasn't over. We still had challenges ahead, ongoing work to do. But we were walking it together now, with new trust in God's grace and power to restore what had been broken. That hope made all the difference. As I think about our story, I find myself wanting to share something with you. Maybe you're facing a similar choice right now. Maybe there's a relationship in your life where silence has built walls, where fear has kept you from being honest, where the weight of maintaining appearances has become crushing. I want you to know, you don't have to stay there. The path toward truth and grace is hard, yes. It might cost you something. It might require confronting patterns and people you've avoided for years. It might mean admitting your own brokenness and weakness, but it's worth it. God is close to the brokenhearted. That promise from Psalm 34,018 is real. When you feel crushed, when you feel alone, when you feel like speaking truth will destroy everything, God is there. His grace is sufficient. His power is made perfect in weakness. And that verse from Matthew, about letting your light shine, it's not about being perfect. It's about being real. About letting people see you're not just putting on a show, but actually trusting God with your whole, messy, broken life. So I want to ask you, where are you facing a choice between silence and truth? Where is God calling you to step toward honesty and grace? It might be with a family member who's hurt you. It might be with a friend you've been avoiding. It might be acknowledging your own failures and need for God's mercy. Whatever it is, I want to encourage you to take that step. Start small if you need to. Maybe it's just admitting to one person that you're struggling. Maybe it's having one honest conversation. Maybe it's asking God to give you courage you don't have yet. Can you lean into God's grace to forgive and heal? Not because the other person deserves it, but because that's what Jesus did for us. That's what mercy looks like. Choosing love when it's costly, extending grace when it's hard, trusting God with the outcome. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. My family's journey has been difficult, messy, and ongoing. We haven't arrived at some perfect destination, but we're on the path now, and that's what matters. We're choosing truth over pretense, grace over judgment, vulnerability over image. And if I can do it. A 62-year-old woman who spent her whole life afraid of speaking up, then you can too. God's grace is big enough for your situation, whatever it is. His love is strong enough to hold you through the hard conversations and the uncertain outcomes. Let me pray for us both. God, I thank you for being close to the brokenhearted. Thank you that your power shows up in our weakness, not our strength. Give us courage to be honest, even when it's scary. Give us grace to forgive, even when it's hard. Help us love like Jesus loves us, fully, freely, without conditions. Show us where you're calling us to step toward truth and healing. And give us faith to take that step, trusting you'll meet us there. In Jesus' name, amen. The path of grace isn't easy, but it's the only path that leads to real freedom, real relationships, real peace. Take the step. God will meet you there.